Welcome to the final session of the Sustainable Supply Chain track. I really enjoyed the panel conversation we had earlier, and Tyler and the scientists really showed us how that fundamental work is really flowing into all these areas. The last piece now, I'd like to introduce Nathan Eaton. He's the Executive Director of NGIS and a longtime Google Earth and Cloud partner specializing in geospatial solutions. He's been instrumental in multiple internationally recognized initiatives, such as the Pacific Island Mapping Sea Level Rise Exposure Project, and also a recipient of the UN Momentum for Change Award at the Paris COP. He's also one of our leading partners as we're bringing Earth Engine into the commercial space. This is a conversation I started with him live in over drinks and sushi back in Australia, and now we're live doing this next piece. So super excited to have him show you some of the things that they've been doing, and then we'll do a live Q&A at the end. So Nathan, please take it away.
Great to be with you, Mr. Sullivan. Thanks very much for having me, and a special thanks to Karen Riley and the whole Geo for Everyone team for the opportunity to be part of Geo for Good Summit. So it's an amazing event, and really, we're just really happy to be a part of it. So as Brian mentioned, Nathan from NGIS, and today I'm really going to be showcasing the application of Google Cloud Geo technology for implementing sustainable sourcing solutions. And I'll kind of take you through the whole flow of how that's coming together and what we're being able to deliver by partnering with Google in this area. But first, just a little bit about us and where we come from as an organization. So we are a dedicated Geo company and Google Premier Partner. We've had the absolute privilege of working with the Outreach team and the Earth Engine team way back, I think 2012, where we really just fell in love with Earth Engine. And not just because we believed it would completely elevate the utility of remote sensing Earth observations around satellite imagery, which it has, but really because of what we believe Earth Engine to be. And that is a platform for impact. So we're a very impact-focused organisation, and so there's a lot of synergies between what the Earth Outreach and Geo for Everyone team is trying to achieve and how we're trying to apply this awesome technology to actually make an impact for global challenges and also our clients that are looking to leverage it. And to give you an idea, Brian mentioned in the intro there some of the work we've been doing in the Pacific Islands, particularly around climate change, using Google Earth Engine and the broader Google Geo platform for actually developing some really innovative applications to communicate climate change science. So this is a bit of an example of some of the work we're doing in Vanuatu. So this is where we've used high-resolution LiDAR data pumped through into Earth Engine to do dynamic modelling of sea level rise, but really being able to distill all of this information, technology and science down into something very tangible for the communities in the Pacific, so they can use it for planning and adaptation against climate change around sea level rise. So this is an example in the middle Malakula Island group of Vanuatu, and this small island is called Maskaline. The dark blue areas you can see here are actually where highest astronomical tide will hit every year. So a significant area of this particular community is already impacted by inundation. And based on the IPCC fifth assessment report, when we did this project, we actually were able to incorporate some latest science for the Pacific to showcase what this inundation may look like by 2100 using Google Earth Engine. So using local tide information, using inundation modelling, and then presenting this specific for that community, and then showing the impact. And for us, when we're building out solutions, as Brian really alluded to, it's the end-to-end workflow of technology, data, but then engagement with the actual end users that really we're focusing on for impact. And so this particular community, you can see there that only 150 of the actual buildings are inundated at high tide currently, but by 2100, that is the majority of buildings in this community. And this is quite a remote community. So the ability to use geotechnology at scale puts a spotlight on some of the areas that are really in need of adaptation. And the work we're doing with Google is allowing us to accelerate how we communicate these impacts. So we've recently updated a lot of our products. This is one in Australia looking at coastal inundation again. And when the IPCC sixth assessment report was released earlier this year, and actually showcased the potential of a very high scenario hitting 2 metre global inundation sea level rise by 2100 and up to 5 metres by 2150. We actually put Google Earth Engine to use to actually show communities what does this actually look like. So The science gives us the information. Google Earth Engine allows us to use that information and then communicate it to actually really understand potential impacts. And that's why we love what Google is doing in this space, particularly around geo, because it's allowing us to do more than we ever have been able to do before in terms of accelerating our workflows and workloads. For anyone that was lucky enough to catch the keynote presentation for Geo for Good, you may have heard one of our EO data science team members, Yvonne, talk around the work they were doing with the Google Earth Outreach team, GEE, but also the group of Earth observations. And so here we're supporting a number of global initiatives to really, once again, accelerate the use of EO technology to apply Google Earth Engine for a number of really significant high impact areas. So looking at disaster management, looking at sustainable development, looking at climate change, biodiversity. We're really privileged to be able to support a global community that's really using Google Earth Engine to make a significant change in terms of these particular initiatives. So I suppose that gives you a bit of a lens of what we've been doing and why we're, I suppose, so keen on Google Earth Engine and so involved in partnering with Google to make an impact. So now I wanted to take you through how we're using the Google technology and particularly Google Earth Engine to actually implement sustainability. And so the lens that we're looking at this through is how do we take a data-driven approach to actually address sustainable sourcing? And with a lot of the organisations we're currently engaged with, I'll talk through some of the key challenges that they have, particularly around their global supply chains, and we'll work through it. How this challenge is really framed at the moment is we have a number of organisations making many and significant commitments to sustainability across a number of different areas, whether that's within deforestation, whether it's in exploitation and social, whether it's greenhouse gas emissions, carbon neutrality. We're seeing an increased number of commitments being made at a very high level, so board level commitments to sustainability. And so this is an example here from Forest Trends where you can actually see the level of commitments increasing from corporate organisations. And currently more than half of the companies exposed to forest risk actually made a public and specific commitment to address deforestation. So we're seeing all of these commitments to deforestation, to sustainability in general, and they're quite broad reaching. So they do differ depending on the different commodities and the different areas that they're working on. So different from cocoa, different from soy, different from tea, different from palm. But they all have some similar aspects to how they need to address these commitments. So this is an example of some of the deforestation. Water change, water levels, water quality is also another significant area that we're involved with in terms of addressing these sustainability commitments. And the work within looking at child labour, forced labour, and some of those social aspects. One of the key things we're seeing with geotechnology and Google in particular is how many different data sets, how many different data themes for sustainability organisations need to actually work with. And what we're seeing is geo is the tool to integrate all of these. So whether we're looking at specific supply chains or we're looking at the risk of sourcing from a specific origin, geo is really the glue that is bringing all this information together. And Google Cloud Geo is really that glue that allows us to scale that activity to provide the metrics. And so we've got this convergence of data, the availability of technology, and these corporate level commitments that are all coming together to create this significant momentum within sustainable sourcing. And that momentum, whilst being driven by corporates and corporates understanding the value, particularly with their brand and how they want to actually be seen in the marketplace, we're also seeing this commitment turn into legislation and law, which is the next step. So, and you can see the example here of the European Climate Law, where they're writing out goals to set in the European Green Deal, that society become completely climate neutral by 2050, but to be legally binding, and a legally binding target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So we're seeing many organisations getting ahead of that curve with their corporate commitments, but we'll also see legislation and law really pushing this to the next level. So with all of those commitments that need to be addressed and monitored, how does Google Geo fit into it? And what's the key challenge for these global organisations? And this is a great tagline from another sustainability partner of Google, Planet, which is you can't fix what you can't see. And for us, this is really at the heart of addressing sustainability and taking a data-driven approach. And if we take a step back, what are some of the really key challenges that global consumer packaged good customers, organizations are actually facing when it comes to mapping out their supply chain? Firstly, it's the complexity. So it's the global nature of the supply chains, it's multiple sourcing regions, and it's looking at the different levels of the supply chain, looking at first party, third hand parties involved in the supply chain, and trying to link that all together. And why we're trying to link that all together is because when we're looking to take a data-driven approach, it's the traceability to first mile that is really the key. So trying to use Google technology and geotechnology to build out all of those linkages. So in palm oil, whether it's coming from plantation estates through to mills, through to refineries, through to factories, it's trying to create all of those linkages so we can get to the actual footprint and the first mile. And supply chain traceability really needs to start with that first mile. And once we have that, and it will always evolve as new suppliers come into the supply chain, but once we have the traceability to footprint, we then have the ability to put Google Earth Engine to work. So looking at creating metrics around deforestation and actually looking at what's happening on the ground. So traceability to footprint is really that fundamental building block of how we can build out these supply chains. And why is Google so important? The mission around Google to organize the world's information, and more recently, the work with Google Earth Engine to organize the world's Earth observation information and to actually accelerate how we use satellite imagery is really pivotal to be able to build out these global supply chains at scale. So what we're finding is the Google Geo platform, and Earth Engine is a key part of that, and with BigQuery, it's allowing organizations with global supply chains to do things they couldn't have done 5 years ago. So it's allowing them to actually map out their supply chain, but to then have monitoring and reporting on a regular cadence to actually understand where they sit. If we've made a commitment for 100% deforestation-free supply chain for palm oil by 2025, where are we currently at? And how are the different techniques and activities we're involved with shifting the needle and turning towards our commitment towards 100% deforestation free? And this, for us, is really where Google's next generation geospatial capabilities is really providing such a significant step up for organizations. So we call Google the Geo Cloud. So as I mentioned before, we're geo nerds, but we do find that the Google Geo capability is allowing us to be able to build out these really complex challenges. And it's not just the global scale, it's the need to accelerate and incorporate new data and accelerate and incorporate new science is all part of that melting pot of how we build out these solutions. So for us, for many people attending Geo for Good, you'll already be big fans of Google Earth Engine as we are, but a couple of the other technologies, particularly around BigQuery, is allowing us to do great things with geospatial. And it's not just mapping out some of the standard workflows, it's understanding risk now, but then it's being able to use some of the geo capabilities in Google for what's risk going to be like in the future, and how do we actually communicate that risk, and how do we evolve that risk? Science doesn't stand still, so one of the key things for us is being able to incorporate new science as it becomes available. And so I showcased the example previously of the IPCC 5th assessment report moving into the 6th. We were able to use Earth Engine to actually pull together that brand new science and actually put a lens on it within days. And that's something that would have taken months previously without the use of Google Tech. And so our role, I think we're often described as the glue. So we partner with organizations to really implement Google Cloud Geo solutions. And that is leading with the Google Cloud Platform that brings together Earth Engine, BigQuery, Google Maps, and a lot of the partner tools such as Cardo, and then bringing all that together with data, whether it's coming from ESA or NASA from Google Earth Engine, or we're trying to incorporate commercial data from Planet and other providers. Really, our role is to try and bring all this technology together, but actually then work with the client to implement these solutions. And whether that's these end user applications or whether it's actually integration with the backend systems, that's the key focus for us. And for anyone that was lucky enough to see some of the work from Unilever that was recently showcased as part of Google Next, this is a great example of where we've been working with Google to actually really make an impact for an organization that is just super innovative with what they're trying to do within sustainable sourcing, have steadfast commitments, and then are really strong in how they're looking to leverage data and geospatial capability to actually move towards those commitments. So definitely encourage you to go back and have a look at what Unilever has produced. So there were some presentations on Google Next. Unilever was also one of the principal sponsors of COP26 recently. And there was some amazing collateral and presentations from their team and how they're actually using Google technology and some of the work that we've been able to do with them to actually address their sustainability commitments around deforestation. So looking at palm, where they're sourcing palm from Indonesia and Malaysia, and then broadening out to multi-commodity play. And it's such a great story with Unilever and how they're partnering with Google and allowing us to be involved in that journey as well. And recently, they put their climate transition action plan from Unilever and their roadmap to how they would achieve these targets out to their shareholder vote. And of the shareholders that voted, 99% were in favour of the plan, which really demonstrates the level of support from shareholders and investors in Unilever's climate agenda, but the overall will around shareholders and consumers in general to actually address sustainability and climate change. So this is a great example of how to actually take Google technology and be innovative with how you're actually addressing sustainability in supply chains. And it's really all driven by the Google Geo Cloud. And so once again, Earth Engine is absolutely at the heart of what Unilever is trying to achieve. And so what we've been doing now is working with the broader Google team to actually look at how we really package up and take this fantastic technology to make a greater impact across industry. And so we've been working with Denise and the fantastic team at Google to build out a new capability and tool called Tracemark, which is really putting together all of the elements I've described, the Google Cloud Geo platform, into a highly repeatable workflow to actually be able to accelerate some of these commitments and monitoring of commitments for global supply chains. And this includes an understanding of sourcing risk, so looking at origins and integrating with potentially volumes from organisations to understand their true footprint and sourcing patterns, doing the mapping and auditing of all of their suppliers and creating those really complex supply chain linkages, but then really distilling down to these sustainability scores and metrics, which is key for Google Earth Engine. So there's a lot of science behind the scenes, but that science needs to be put in a way that can make a difference to the procurement team, can actually be easily communicated with suppliers so they understand their sustainability rating, where they compare with other suppliers and benchmarks, so they can understand their impacts and their potential for new contracts based on their sustainability scores. And then it's constant monitoring of global supply chains, bringing in new alerts, and then looking further ahead at future risk and being able to engage with the broader organisation and engage with suppliers around changing behaviours and actually looking at what activities are actually making an impact. And once again, I'll loop back to the term of first mile sustainability and traceability to footprint. And for us, that's the key. So it is these complex global supply chains. It is these organisations with significant corporate commitments and a need to address those using data. And then it's the ability to use geo capability and geo AI to really infer linkages and actually deliver traceability down to the first mile and down to the footprint. And a lot of this is really about observing our planet, but it's accelerating the science, the use of science, and accelerating how organisations are adopting this technology and data into their workflows to really create impact. So we're really excited about the coming 12, 24 months with the Google team and what we're doing with Tracemark and hopefully making some significant impacts to industry that is really trying to address sustainability in their supply chains. And so that's a bit of an overview of where we're at. I'll pass back to you, Brian. Thanks for the opportunity again to present and be part of this fantastic event.
All right, Nathan, thanks so much for that presentation. In working with you kind of through some of the work with Unilever, I know a lot of this kind of has roots in palm, but where do you kind of see this process and this methodology? Is this something that you really just see it as a commodity thing, or are there other areas beyond agriculture that you really think this could be leveraged?
Yeah, good question, Brian. And so definitely agriculture. So Unilever was very much starting with palm, but there's a lot of other commodities that you'd put into that same category, whether it's cotton, whether it is tea, whether it's cocoa, whether it's soy. And a lot of these commodities have similar aspects with what they need to do to address sustainability. And it's all around first mile, it's all around traceability. And some of the common sustainability metrics will be very similar, whether it's deforestation, whether it's child labour and forced labour. So we certainly see this as a multi-commodity approach, but not just within ag, as you mentioned, Brian, but also within the extractive industries as well that are focusing on sustainability, and organisations that are using extractive industry outputs. So whether that's from batteries and actually looking at sustainable sourcing of nickel, cobalt, lithium, and understanding where they're being sourced from, understanding certifications and how they're being managed across the board for global supply chains. We see kind of 50 to 75% of the sustainable sourcing will be similar, but then it's always going to be targeted towards different commodities, different regions, even different origins that are all slightly different. But Google allows us to kind of bring that global approach together.
So a lot of people at the Geo for Good conference historically have been coming from heavy research, academic, and NGO space. And a lot of the work we're doing now, in some cases, is with these kind of core commercial, often multinational organizations. What role do you see kind of these traditional users in that space really being able to contribute? Do you see commercial opportunities for them? Kind of what's their role in kind of this broader value chain?
Yeah, another good question. And so we've seen a number of different levels of interaction and opportunity for NGOs. So whether it's within building out fundamental data sets that form part of the supply chain, we've certainly seen a number of different examples of that and great opportunities for NGOs to really build out fundamental data that is just so crucial in terms of sustainable sourcing. But also the role of NGOs in grievances and identifying issues and actually making those visible and available to organisations that genuinely want to know where there are issues and be able to use that information to address them. And then we've also been lucky enough through a couple of other projects to be involved with organisations such as the International Cocoa Initiative, where they're looking to actually do field level surveys on a really significant scale to identify evidence of child labour in supply chain, but then to use data and analytics to actually come up with predictive models around child labour risk. So not just evidence, but then where is the future risk of child labour and how can that be addressed? So I think there's a number of different levels for NGOs, and I think it's such a key part of this overall conversation, Brian.
I think it's interesting, even just the last session that Tyler had hosted, looking at kind of how that science kind of continues to evolve. And what we've really seen is part of the power of Earth Engine isn't really just the raw data or the computing power, but it's the community that's forming around this. And we're seeing Earth Engine kind of as an ability to kind of be an interoperable platform across organizations as well as standards to kind of bring those components in.
Yeah,
so
agreed.
On a similar note, I know NGIS does a lot of work with Indigenous communities, and I'm curious whether you see, are they part of this ecosystem as well? Often they're the ones that may be affected more, or it's their land, or it's their environment. But is that work that within NGIS is kind of fairly separate, or is that something that you see coming together as well?
They're definitely coming together. And so we're really passionate about Indigenous engagement, particularly in this space. And so we do a lot of work within the Indigenous Mapping Workshop, which is fantastically supported by Riley and the Google team. In terms of the role within sustainable sourcing, what we're finding is traditional owner engagement, Indigenous engagement, and metrics is a really core part of that fundamental data. And so being able to incorporate that and attaching that to the first mile is absolutely a part of what organisations will be reporting on. But one of the key things within incorporating that data, so whether it's looking at native title areas and looking at mine sites and their engagement with traditional owners and their level of engagement and commitment, and including that in their sustainability scores. But then also looking at monitoring. So what Google Earth Engine opens up is opportunities to use satellite imagery at a scale that really hasn't been available previously. So being able to use not just NASA and ESA data, but say daily imagery from Planet to actually monitor heritage areas that have been identified for traditional owners as areas of significant importance, and actually being able to use Earth Engine to provide analytics of work around those areas to provide early warning of where there could be potential issues from activities. I think that's a really key part of engagement with Indigenous groups, and we see as a fantastic role of Earth Engine. So we're very much invested in using this technology for that aspect as well, Brian.
Are there ways that you see kind of Indigenous communities kind of being at the same table as these large corporations, or do you see the technology as an intermediary between the two?
We see technology as the enabler. So not just providing the technology, but it's how it's delivered. And so the work we're doing with our partner Winyama, an Indigenous-owned organisation, they're working really heavily on how to actually communicate information in a way that is relevant to traditional owners. So it may be looking at communicating things differently. So it's not boundaries as we would see in a typical geospatial information, but it's maybe linking activities towards different landscape-based features and being able to communicate those in 3D and being able to communicate current and future activities in a way that makes sense. And we had the same experience in the Pacific Islands with really heavy science around future inundation models and climate change projections, but really needing to distill that information down into a way that is engaging. And so not trying to overload the science, but really focus on your key message. And so the work that Winyama is doing is great in terms of trying to bring in all of that really unique communication approach with Indigenous groups, for sure.
Just taking another side of it, as we start moving into kind of these large multinational organizations, there's different functional groups that a project like Tracemark could start. And so do you find that this is something that the IT organizations are interested in? Would you enter through procurement? Is this something that you kind of go at the top level board commitments, or where do you find that balance when you're starting to engage with these commercial entities?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so a lot of the impetus will come from the sustainable sourcing group. But quickly it turns out into all the metrics that are being calculated, the sustainability scores and metrics, where they're then actually used is in contract negotiations. How do you normalize those scores? It's usually with bringing through volume information. So you actually understand how much you're sourcing from different suppliers, so how much of an impact they have in terms of their sustainability. And this is a data and analytics play. So the ability to then use this fundamental capability would be typically an IT function that want to leverage this as a self-service platform to actually take the use of geo to the next level, not just for sustainability, but for a number of different other use cases. So typically we start with sustainable sourcing, Brian, but then it touches on so many parts of the business that typically we would look to bring those in with our approach with Tracemark and Google technology.
And then finally, maybe as the last question, I mean, you've been in the space for a long time. What are some of the shifts that you've seen in the last year or two that are really kind of bringing this drive? Is it more of a technology thing? Is it a policy? Do you see kind of commercial commitments that are driving it, or what's really been shifting or accelerating in the last year or two?
Yeah, I think you not to make fun of my age and experience within this sector, Brian, but what we're seeing is obviously acceleration. So I think I mentioned before, we're doing things with satellite imagery, with analytics, with sustainable sourcing that we couldn't do 5 years ago. And if we did do it 5 years ago, it would have taken us 10 times as long. So it's that acceleration that we're really excited about. We think that's the key change over the last couple of years. And Google Earth Engine is the absolute epitome of what that looks like. It's the ability to go from 0 to 100 without having to do a lot of those back-end processes that would be typical of remote sensing workflows. So it's that acceleration that I think is the real change. And it's all around cloud geospatial and the Google Cloud Geo. But then when you've got that, it's also the scale. So those two things together, acceleration, global scale, and the point you made previously as well around engagement, that's the third part of the puzzle, right? In terms of this is where we get impact. It's where we provide those outputs and actually use them. So the ability to engage with the audience and a new audience that we haven't worked with previously in many circumstances, that's where we're seeing the change.
Great. I think the last thing that I've seen as we start looking at other kind of commercial uses of Earth Engine, we're seeing the financial sector and the investment sector really step up, because kind of a lot of these loans are the things that are kind of enabling some of this deforestation or some of this rapid growth that's unchecked. And I think making more of these supply chains transparent is something that those institutions that are funding these really want to see. And when it's public and it's transparent, there's also kind of a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that those are being done in a sustainable manner, even if it's just from a business perspective, because these are businesses that have to exist for the next generation and beyond. And if these resources are exploited, that's a commercial risk that they don't want to be taking. So with that, I think we're really just on time. So Nathan, thank you so much for joining today. This marks the end of our kind of sustainable supply chain program. The next summit that's coming up is our networking time, and that'll be starting in just under 15 minutes. So I hope to see many of you there. And then in about 5 hours, we'll have our second APAC hour. So you can tune in and hear from about 6 speakers. They're leveraging Google's mapping to address the forest and nature and sustainable supply chain applications. So thank you, everybody, for joining today. Have a wonderful night, and have a great summit, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian.